Okay, everybody, my computer says we are now recording. So I hope everyone is of good spirits. Uh, this class is scheduled for March 13th, 2023. And I guess that the office has advised you due to the two holidays that we had. This class is only going complete 9 weeks. So that's great news. So that means today's class for March 13th is the last class. And then next week, the 20th, I shall just be sending your final exam. And then once you finish that, um, it's vacation time, right? It's break from actually the 21st until April the 2nd. And you guys can enjoy yourself. Okay, so without further ado, let me proceed. And again, I might be kind today, let you go a little early because it is the last class. So we'll see. Okay, so let me go through my procedures here. Share the screen. Hit the sausagey, right? Slideshow. Go from the beginning. All right. So again, this is school code ENG 107, English composition and reading. Okay. Week 8. And we're going to be the first part talking about revising. Okay. Very important skill for revising. So let's get into it. Revising, which means re-seeing your writing. So you'll have your initial inspiration, and what that is and what that feels like. And then later looking at it when you're not wrapped up and involved in the inspiration. And that way you can see not only mistakes, typographical mistakes, but you can look at your inspirations, because there's probably going to be a few in the paper, from afar, not being wrapped up in it or them. Okay, so here we go. Wow, you've gone through the whole writing process, thinking about audience and purpose, exploring, creating a thesis, organizing, choosing a mode. That's not a la mode, right? Ice cream on top of that hot pie. Drafting, even researching. Now you have a completed piece of writing, an essay, an email, a proposal. Could we say love note? I don't know. Research paper or other form of writing. You're done, right? Right? You're done? You're finished? No. Wait a minute. Actually, in many ways, you are just beginning. You need to revise. It's the smart thing to do. You can be lazy and not do it, but you're probably going to lose a lot of points on the paper. Uh, Revising for most writers is the most important thing to improve your writing. Sounds like a good question on the final, right? For most writers, what is the most important thing? Write the paper, bing bong. No, improve your writing is revising. The most crucial part of the writing process. You may think that a completed first draft means little improvement is needed. You just need to fix errors. Even experienced writers, however, need to improve their drafts, and they rely on peers. That's for you guys, everybody in your class is your peer during revising and editing. So see, that's the big thing. That's what everybody thinks. Well, I just have to fix some grammatical errors. But a lot of times, rereading your paper can take you in a much different direction and many times a much clearer direction. And we have this little thing here. The short story writer, Raymond Chandler, said a writer should throw up into your typewriter in the morning, clean up every noon. So obviously he's joking there, but the part he's trying to push forward to you is the throw up part is your inspiration. You throw up your inspiration, right? It's figuratively. And you think it's great, but you're going to have to clean it up. You know, I guess it's, writers who are really strict on trying to do the best that they can and cut through their own ego, right? They might say, it's kind of, you got to look at it like if you've been drinking. And a lot of times people get drunk and then they think they say all these fantastic things, and then somebody shows them a video of what they actually said the night before when they thought they were Einstein, and they say, "Oh my God, I wish I could take some of that stuff back." So do not forget to do your revising. Next, you may know that athletes miss catches, right? Guys from the Rams drop the balls, Raiders. They fumble balls or overshoot goals. Dancers forget steps, turn too slowly, or miss beats. Beats. Love those beats. For both athletes and dancers, the more they practice, the stronger their performance will become. Right? That's the old saying, practice makes perfect. Web designers seek better images, a more clever design, or a more appealing background for their web pages. Writers have the same capacity to profit from improvement and revision. That's a pretty good line. Writers have the same capacity, means ability to profit, to gain from improvement and revision. So try to think of it like that. Don't think of it like, oh man, it's another step. I just finished writing. I'm tired. No, think of it, if I do this revision, I can profit from it. Everybody wants that. But we're here in the middle. Revising is the act of starting the writing process over again. When you have a completed draft, you need to go back and check that the draft works. Right? It's all together. It's not all over the paper. Take a second look at your ideas. You might add, cut, move, or change information to make your ideas clearer, more accurate, more interesting, or more convincing, right? Some people realize, that thing that I wrote in the middle, I think I should do that at the end. Switchy swatchy. So we look at the box there, right? Boxy poo. It says, that's the magic of revisions. Every cut is necessary and every cut hurts, but something new always grows. Okay, that's how they edit movies too. The movie's finished and have to send it to an editor. And then many times they relook over things and say, this little part is not necessary. Or maybe it would be better if we have a voiceover, narration, whatever. Just think of it, the profit from revision. Peer review, again, these are your classmates. Peer review is getting feedback from others. Peer review can be very formal, like a composition class where you have 2 or 3 students read your essay draft and give suggestions on how to improve it, or where you give it to a colleague to review before you give it to your mutual boss. Okay, so they're giving you the two examples there. So even though we're online right now, if you're close to somebody in your class, or it can even be your brother or your friend, have them read it, see what they think, right? And it says here at the work too, you have other people who are doing your job. Let them read it before you give it to your boss, right? All this stuff can help. Don't feel embarrassed about it. Okay? In the middle, it could also be more informal. For example, you could have your friend's girlfriend, who is an English major, look over your essay and give you ideas or point out errors or inconsistencies. See, there you go. Have your girlfriend's friend who's an English major, and then she can help you out with it. You might even use a campus writing center for feedback, or an online tutoring center like Smart Thinking or tutor.com. Once you receive feedback from others, the more the better, they stress. Then you can sift or mix through it to see what is helpful. You might find contradictions at times. One reader might love your conclusion, while another might think it's uninteresting. And such is the way of the world. In the end, you can decide how to change and shape your writing. The great thing about peer review is that it helps you look more closely at things. For example, you might decide parts of your conclusion are good, but that you need to add a story at the end to engage the reader, right? So what they're saying there is um, your conclusion, the parts might be very informative, but if they read like, for example, just the statistics, it's pretty boring. And you don't want to lose your readers at the end of your paper that you work so hard to do. So if you add a little story to it, it might engage the reader and they will sit through your facts and numbers. Right? Right. Peer review. Now we'll shift into reorganizing. In the revision stage, you might need to reorganize your draft. Maybe you originally planned to organize the paragraphs chronologically, which means step by step 1, 2, 3, 4. But as you work on revising, you realize you are overlapping ideas too much. You can then go back and replan. You might even make a new outline to guide your new organization. Instead of time order, you might revise to order of importance, right? This means changing topic sentences, moving around main points and examples, and most likely getting rid of some things and adding others. It might also mean writing a new introduction or conclusion to fit your new ideas and new order because your old ones will not work together with the new material that you have changed. And we have slash and burn, which is the kind of way that some countries get rid of their garbage. Finally, in revision, you need to be willing to get rid of things that aren't working. And many times when you do a revision, you find out things are not working. They just don't sound right. Or they don't mesh together. It might be language. It might be the introduction or conclusion. It might be a whole body paragraph. Go through your draft and circle anything you question or seems inconsistent. Remember before when I gave you the example of you're supposed to write about the different kinds of hot dogs, right? You write about the Chicago dog and a chili dog, right? And then the next dog, you probably should have wrote about the LA dog, but you started talking about hamburgers. So paper has gone off point, right? So if you're willing to jettison, which means get rid of, these parts that don't support your thesis, create engagement for your reader, or are unneeded or uninteresting. So engagement for your reader, again, is like what we just covered, adding some kind of story at your conclusion to keep the people from being bored just reading statistics. Okay. Next, strategies for revising. So it always helps to have strategies before you do something instead of just running into doing something without thinking beforehand. How do you get the best out of your revising process? Here are some strategies that writers have developed to look at their first drafts from a fresh perspective. The first one, take a break. You're proud of what you wrote, but you might be too close to it to make changes. What they mean there is they don't mean you're physically like sitting too close to the paper. What they're saying is that you love your piece so much that it's going to stop you from possibly making good changes to make it even better. So set aside your writing for a few hours a day, even a week, until you can look at it objectively. Okay? And that is the point, to look at it objectively. Next, ask someone you trust for feedback and constructive criticism. So don't ask one of your funky friends that you're not sure of a relationship. They'll probably just say something negative. But ask somebody mature and smart or educated and just say, hey, could you honestly read this and give me your feedback? Okay. And they should be able to help you. Pretend you are one of the readers. So that's tough. That's looking at it again after you've set your time aside and then say, okay, I'm not who I am. My name is not Temujin. So I have a new personality today, and I'm going to read this and see what I like it or not. Okay, and then why. Next, use the resources that your college or workplace provides. Find out where your school's writing lab is located and ask about the assistance they provide online and in person, or discuss your draft with peers, classmates, friends, or writing experts in your workplace. The last one on this page, read something in the same mode around the same topic that is a good text. Do you see any hints there for modeling your own work? So that's good. That's interesting. So I had a friend who did this. He liked to write science fiction, right? But he was like, I don't know if my writing is any good or not. So he read a Star Trek novel and Babylon 5 and other things. And then he looked for any hints that might make his stuff sound even better. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Don't plagiarize, but take the hints. Okay. Where's my arrow? Do, 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 do. Okay, now we're going to move on to retaining the information. We're moving along at a good pace here. Looks like I'll be able to if you guys go early, but maybe not. Maybe I'll go against it. Okay, so to retain the information is to, it's another term for reading comprehension. Okay? You actually come to comprehend what you read. Okay, so the ultimate test of your comprehension is what you remember after you have finished your reading. As a student, most of your reading will be for classes. You know, sooner or later you'll be required to regurgitate. Regurgitate is a fancy word for repeat the information you've read in some type of format. An essay test, right? My test, you have to remember and write the small answers. A term paper, a multiple choice, true or false, Did you eat that cookie or not? Or fill in the blank final, which can sometimes be the most tough. Okay, so beyond just being able to complete your reading assignments, you want to be sure that you remember what you read. So again, I've had classmates in the past, and they'll tell me something like, "How long did it take you to read it?" I said, 6 hours. Like, I did it in 3, haha. But they weren't trying to remember anything. They didn't have any reading comprehension. The only thing they remembered was the title of the book. So that's not good. That means you have to read it again. So where I took double the time, I had a lot of reading comprehension and was able to write a lot of things. So none of this is a race, okay? None of it is a race. So again, repeating. So beyond just being able to complete your reading assignments, you want to be sure you remember what you've read. All of you have probably had the experience of forgetting that one fact that made the difference between an A minus and a B plus, or a B minus and a C plus. It was sitting right there on the tip of your brain, but you couldn't remember it. We've all been there. What did my one student tell me one time? Teacher, I had a brain fart. Okay, it's interesting. Okay, here's reasons why we forget. As you think about the elements of developing good memory, you can use them to address why you forgot. The root of poor memory is usually found in one of these areas. We fail to make the material meaningful. And that's correct. For a lot of people, if they can't connect to it, it doesn't mean anything to them, they easily forget about it, right? So you have to try to make the reading meaningful. You can't just read it and say, well, this is not my life experience, so it doesn't interest me. And it's not the correct way to be a college student. You have to read it and say, this is a different life experience than mine. So this book is allowing me to experience it for myself. And I can see how it feels or what have you. That's how you look at it, and you'll be able to remember it instead of possibly having a brain fart, like my past student. Next, we did not learn prerequisite material. Sometimes some reading does need prerequisite or prior material. You just cannot jump into a certain subjects without, and that's not your fault. That should be on the teacher, but that's very few. That's like saying, like, you need an intro class to whatever the subject is instead of just going into the subject. Most subjects are not like that. Next, we fail to grasp what is being remembered. That's just a straight shot at your understanding. So I will give you an example like this, okay? I don't know anything about astrophysics, okay? I would probably need a lot of prerequisite material because I'm not an astrophysicist. So if they gave me high level reading material about astrophysics, I might not be able to understand most. And if that's the case, then it's going to be impossible to remember the pertinent information because, it's a selective field. So that's an attempt to. But in our classes, nothing's going to be like that. Oh, quantum physics. No, not at all. Next, we do not have the desire to remember. Okay, well that's on the student. Okay. If the student doesn't care, or I just want to read and do the pages, well, you don't really want to remember these things. So that's kind of like that's on you guys. Okay, so don't be in that situation. Next, we allow apathy or boredom to dictate how we learn. So again, apathy is just giving up. Boredom is you find it boring, so it's going to be on you to try to make the material not boring. And you can ask your teacher. You're in class, ask your teacher, how can I find this material somewhat boring. How can I look at it a different way? Or could you give me an idea how to think about it in a more interesting way? And usually teachers, they're really attached to their books, like when they give you novels and things to read. They've read that thing 100 times. So that being said, those kinds of classes, the teacher should be able to tell you, oh, I fantasized this and I looked at that and I saw this movie. And so they should be able to help you. Okay. And then six, another reason why we forget is we have no set habit for learning. And that's true. Maybe some students are just kind of like on the genius level on some things, but the higher you get in school, some things you need strategies and ways to learn and habits. And if you don't, it doesn't matter how smart you are, it's going to slow down your learning ability and, of course, lower your grades. So set some habits for learning, and we've talked about that before. Okay, seven, we are disorganized and inefficient in our use of study time. Okay, so this is an easy one. This goes back to, and I did it before too in college, and I think everybody has done it. Uh, it's the old, go to class, barely stay awake, and I'll read it later, and then you read it, the night before. You get the coffee pot rolling, and you're gonna try to do it all in one night. Okay, so that's what that says. Okay, by telling you we are disorganized and inefficient in our study time. You're not doing it correctly. You should read a little bit every day, making to a big chunk by the end of the week, instead of enjoying yourself and then I'll do it the last minute. Take these no dose pills and drink a bunch of caffeine. It's not that. That's disorganized and it's inefficient um, use of your time. Next, we do not use the knowledge we have gained. So you don't make it useful for yourself, which is a great thing to do that. And if you don't, you'll lose it. You'll forget it. All of us are inundated, which kind of means like flooded, okay, with information every day because of social media and iPhones and the internet. So we're inundated or flooded with information every day. Bombarded, like being hit by news bombs, right? Bombarded with facts, concepts, and opinions. We are capable of absorbing some information simply because the media drench us with it. Drench, that's when you stand on a corner and it's raining, and then after a few minutes, you're just completely drenched, or, you know, you are like the human sponge. Okay. So what they're saying there is, let's say you're just studying and somewhat playing with your iPhone in the Starbucks for 4 or 5 hours. Okay? That's where you are. Now, in the Starbucks, while you're doing that, they have the TV on. I don't know what it is, CNN, let's say. And during the 6 hours you are there, who knows how many times CNN gave you these little news flashes about something about President Biden or what's going on in politics or Meghan Markle going to leave Harry or whatever. So when they say in order to retain, okay, the media can drench us with it. You can absorb simply. So if you hear that so many times in your 6 hours, it's in your brain. You didn't even try to study it. It's just, oh, Biden fell asleep. Meghan Markle ran away with George Clooney, and it's there, right? So, but in order to retain most information, we have to make a concerted effort to do so. So they're talking about your study, right? You must make the same effort with the material we read. Got that? All right. How to remember. Now we get to go into some techniques on how to remember. There are some basic tools that will help you remember what you read. First tool is understanding. You will remember only what you understand. When you read something and grasp the message, you have begun the process of retention. The way to test this is to rephrase the message in your own words. Can you summarize the main idea? Unless you understand what is being said, you won't be able to decide whether to remember or discard it, which means throw it away. So this goes back to what we talked about earlier. If you can't understand it, that was my astrophysics example, right? I have to understand it, at least on a basic level. And then to keep it, I have to be able to put it in my own words. If I can't do it, the mind will just discard it on its own. Next, desire. Let me repeat. You remember what you choose to remember. If you do not want to retain some piece of information or don't believe you can, then you won't. To remember the material, you must want to remember it and be convinced that you remember it. So this is all wrapped around desire. It says, let me repeat, you remember what you choose. Not to be so harsh here, but what they're trying to say is more on the lines of what you really like is what you choose to remember. So again, like a lot of, let me say, young teenage boys, they don't really like their study, right? So it's hard for them to remember things, but they love NFL or baseball statistics. And you'll be amazed at their mental capacity they talk about one player. Well, in 2020, he hit 35 home runs. And then 2021, he went down to 27. And then last year, he went back up to 29. Oh, and he had 101 runs batted in. And you're like, how does he remember all these categories? And how does he remember the exact numbers, right? That's because he chooses to. It makes him happy to remember these numbers. So you have to put some of that desire into wanting to remember the material, even from a boring novel, your novel reading class. And that way your mind will say, well, I can't remember it. Otherwise, and I've heard students say that, I can't remember this stuff. I don't know, Shakespeare and Romeo and Juliet, and they went to the In and Out, and Romeo got a flat tire or whatever. They don't know what's going on, right? So what you apply, what you like, do it to your classwork. Next is overlearn. To ensure or make sure that you retain material, you need to go beyond simply doing the assignment. Some students just say, well, I did the assignment. That's it. Whatever I remember, I remember. That's not good enough, especially if you want to get a good grade. To really remember what you learn, you should learn material thoroughly or overlearn. This involves pre-reading the text, doing a critical read, and having some definite means of review that reinforces what you should have learned. So that's really studying the material there. You look at it like, well, see, this is a smart way, and you have to use psychology. This is like a person saying, adopting the mindset, I'm not going to understand this. So, if I don't trust myself in not understanding this, I'm going to pre-read the text. This is a strategy, techniques. I'll do a critical read, and then I'll have some definite means of I'll review it. So all that stuff is going to reinforce what I've learned. Okay. And it's kind of, like I said, it's a psychological move to get you to understand things. All right. Kind of tricking yourself there. And that's the point. Next, systematize. It's more difficult to remember random thoughts or numbers than those organized in some pattern. For example, which phone number is easier to remember? 538-6284 or 678-123. See the pattern difference? It's just like reading your first number list, right? 538, they're scattered, they're different, right? They're not organized. 6, 2 goes low, then goes back high, goes in the middle. Or you just go, oh, 678, 1, 2, 3, 4. I had a friend, he lived at 1234 Oxnard Boulevard. I can never forget the guy's address. 1234 Oxnard Boulevard, apartment 1 or apartment A. Never forget it. So once you recognize the pattern in the second number, it takes much less effort to remember the first, right? So once you remember 1, 2, 3, 4, what was the first part? Well, 6, 7, 8. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Okay. You should develop the ability to discern or decide between the two things, the structure that exists, and recall it when you try to remember. Have a system to help you recall how information is organized and connected. That's why other people have like, if these were not organized, like the last part of the number, 1, 2, 3, 4, if it was 1, 0, 1, 4, the guy might say 1014, and then you know the numbers, right? So you can have different techniques, different styles. Next, association. It's helpful to attach or associate what you are trying to recall to something you have in your memory. Mentally link new material to existing knowledge so that you are giving this new thought some context in your mind. Many, many years ago, okay, I went to bartending school and eventually became a bartender. Did that for a few years. All right. And to remember all the drink recipes and garnishes, the techniques were taught heavily on word association, right? So once you already have a knowledge of something and then you associate it with some new information, you can remember easier. So I will give you some examples of some techniques that I was taught in bartending school many years ago. Okay, there was a drink that was popular that was called a Cuba Libre. Now they start teaching you, for example, I'll give you another drink. They'll start teaching you to make word associations with the recipe, okay, or with the name, because you're trying to remember the recipe in your mind. You have to know them and knock the drinks out as fast as you can. They don't sit there and let you look at a recipe book, right? Customers want to be taken care of. So there was a drink called a Black Russian. I don't know if anybody drinks that anymore, right? So guys will say, because they would give you drinks in threes. Like say, give me a Black Russian, give me a margarita, and give me a Cuba Libre. So you start doing that and you're all over the place. Which one do I make first? What was what? Who said what? Who's on first? Somebody stole third. Okay. So Black Russian, okay, black, what is the darkest liquor that you have? And that's Kahlua. There's nothing darker than Kahlua. So that's your black. Your Russian is vodka. So anytime somebody says Russian, it's always going to be vodka. So and the difference between your liquors and your liqueurs. So it's going to be 1.5 ounces of vodka, and then you fill the rest with the black Kahlua. Okay, and you got a Cuba Libre now. Hopefully, you start getting the idea. Cuba is rum. Okay, and it's an old drink, so they drank that with Coca-Cola when it was first introduced to Cuba. But the difficult one of this is remembering the garnish. If you just put rum and Coke, the drink is a rum and Coke. It is not a Cuba Libre. So Cubans put a garnish of lime on that drink, and then it becomes a Cuba Libre. So that's why you always have to say, Cuba Libre, give them the lime. And then you'll never forget that. It doesn't take a cherry, it doesn't take an onion, but it takes a lime wedge to put on the drink. Okay, so that's what they say here. That's what they're talking about when they talk about association. Something you already know, try to get that and associate it with the new material you are learning. Okay. Next, a procedure to improve recall. Each time you attempt to read something that you must recall, use this 6-step process. 1, evaluate the material and define your purpose for reading. Identify your interest level and get a sense of how difficult the material is. So like I mentioned earlier, if I want to read some type of astrophysics, they better give me an intro course, and I got to look at it and say, how difficult is this going to be? Right? And then what's my interest level? 2, choose appropriate reading techniques for the purpose of your reading. Different types of reading, different levels are going to require different techniques. 3, identify the important facts. Remember what you need to. Identify associations that connect details you must recall. Okay, that's a good way of at least doing a pretty decent paper. If you're just I used the word they used earlier in this reading, bombarded, right, with too much information, just remember the most important. And that'll make you survive that paper. If you give up on everything, you're doomed. But if you at least remember the most important facts and you don't remember a lot of the side facts, you might not get an A, right? But you might get a B. Or the other people they forgot everything and are just guessing. which you don't want to do that. Next 4, take notes. Use your own words to give a synopsis. Remember, that's like a summary or a plot line of the main ideas. Use an outline, diagram, or concept tree to show relationships and patterns. Your notes provide an important backup to your memory. Writing down key points will further reinforce your ability to remember. And use those little skinny post-its and put them in your reading and go back and just sort of, I got to read the whole page. No, you've already read it once. Go back and look at your key points, right? The more key points you do, the better your paper will be if you find it's not to your liking. Next, review. Quiz yourself on those things you must remember. Develop some system by which you review notes at least 3 times before you are required to recall. The first review should be shortly after you've read the material, the second a few days later, and the final just before you are expected to recall. This process will help you avoid cram sessions. Those cram sessions is what I mentioned before about the night before the test and the pot of coffee. This is interesting because, like I said, the main thing, if you can remember the main points, is fine. But let's say you also document, like, let's say three areas where you are having difficulty with. If you try to study that material more, you might be able to understand it, and that's going to add even more points. So instead of getting a B, you might get a B plus, right? Next is implement. Implement is to use. Find opportunities to use the knowledge you have gained. Study groups and class discussions are invaluable opportunities to implement what you've learned. Again, working with your peers. Memorizing and mnemonics. Yes, the M is silent. There are some specific methods to help you recall when you must remember a lot of specific facts. The first of these is rote memorization. And that's the process of trying to recall information word for word. Memorize only when you're required to remember something for a relatively short time. When you have a history quiz on battle dates, a chemistry test on specific formulas, or a vocabulary test in French. When memorization is required, you should do whatever is necessary to impress the exact information on your mind. Repetition is probably the most effective method. Write down the information on a 3x5 card and use it as a flashcard. You must quiz yourself frequently to assure that you know the information perfectly. That was a big technique that in my day people really studied flashcards. It was very important, right? A second technique for recalling lots of details is mnemonics. A mnemonic device is used to help recall large bits of information which may or may not be logically connected. Such mnemonics are invaluable when you must remember facts not arranged in a clear fashion. Items that are quite complicated and numerous items that are part of a series. One of the simplest methods is to try to remember just the first letter of a sequence. That's how Roy G. Biv, the colors of the spectrum, in order from left to right: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. So they're saying like this: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. You just say Roy G. Biv, and you should be able to remember this. Came about. Or every good boy does fine. To remember the notes on the musical staff. I guess that's E, G, B, D, and F. Or perhaps the simplest of all, face, to remember the notes in between. of the music. See, everybody has a strategy. We're on to the questions. Okay, so the revising questions first. 1, revising is which part of the writing process? Hopefully you wrote that in a little tricky way. So, but yet easy. 2, what is peer review? No funny guys. Well, I went to the Santa Monica Pier and I got my fishing pole out and I was reviewing the fish. That's not a peer review. 3, in the revision stage, you might have to do what? Drink a beer? No. Well, you could. 4, what is slash and burn technique? And again, I'm not talking about horticulture. 5, in the strategies for revising list, what does the third point say? That's pretty easy. You just go back. Well, how many was it? 5 points? And you just take number 3. Oh, man. We'll have to take that out for the final. Okay, let's move on to the retaining the information. What is the ultimate test of your comprehension? I've had funny students like that. They watch the movie instead of reading the book. And they said, see, I remember everything, except movie usually leaves out most of the book. 2, list 3 areas we might forget. Remember, there was a forgetting list. 3, what are the 5 basic tools that will help you remember? And again, I'm not talking about screwdriver, Phillips screwdriver, wrench, or hammer. 4, list a 6-step process to improve recall. So list them all, folks. 5, what is a mnemonic device? That's one of those things that cooks hamburgers down at the McDonald's, right? No. So that's it, folks. We are done for the last week of material. So after you do this, then the next week will be the final. Okay. So good luck with everyone, and welcome to spring and spring forward, fall back, and all those things with the time change. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.